for having invited me to these talks. So I have the task of concluding this this session. So I'm trying to make it as exciting as possible. And actually, the first presentation of this session is making my job a bit easier here, because there's a few things about magnetism that we've seen before that I don't have to introduce anymore. So by now, I hope you're convinced by the fact that magnetic actuation is a fantastic technology. It's a scalable method. It has the ability to apply mechanical actions at a distance. And especially for robotics, the very good part about magnetics is that in combination with soft structures, you can perform very dexterous, safe and robust tasks at various scales. And so our lab is at the forefront of this research for about 20 years. And my objective today is to give you an overview of our recent results of using this technology in various contexts. So in this slide, you see an overview of what I'm going to talk about today. You see some soft structure being deformed, some continuum robots being steered, some transport method, some transport of small particles using rotating magnetic field, and some locomotion pattern using soft magnetic robots. So as it had been said before, the magnetics, the fundamentals is that you can apply forces on the dipole moment by generating the magnetic gradient. So basically, said differently, if I have a magnet, I put it in a magnetic field which strength vary over space. The magnet's going to be attracted to the strongest field. And the magnet tends to align with the magnetic field, and this is what happened with your compass needle. And eventually, as it has been said before, to generate this external magnetic field, you need a machine that's going to apply this field. And I use a slightly different terminology that what has been used before, but in our lab we call that electromagnetic navigation systems. And we have been demonstrating this magnetic manipulation capabilities early on, as back as 2008, where the multi-scale robotics lab at the time developed the Octomag, which I believe is the system you've seen earlier. And essentially, it's a set of electromagnets that are current controlled, and by controlling the currents in the different electromagnets and having a model of this system, you can generate your field and manipulate your objects. And so one of the skills we have in the lab, even far before I joined the lab, is to build these systems. So one of the things that has been the work in our lab since 2010 was to design larger systems where you can fit either big animals. So this is the Cardiomag, but in 2010, that led to human scale systems in 2015. And these systems, as a matter of fact, has been used in humans to perform cardiac ablations. And now for a few years, we are trying to make these systems still compatible with humans, but systems that could be portable and better integrated into the operating room. So this is where the Navion come from. This is the third generation of systems we've been designing in the lab that has magnetic fields which strengths are still compatible with humans, but that are much easier to integrate into an operating room. And so designing these systems is a bit of an art. It took us quite a few years to get that right. And so I'm going to talk to you a bit about these technologies later on. As for the magnetic robots, so basically the robots are going to be interacting with the field generated by these systems. Well, of course, we all know about this rigid structure that can be manipulated with the magnetic field. But as I said before, the very interesting part about our work, I think, is to consider soft structures. And in that case, it means that you can induce deformation on this soft material by applying the magnetic field. I'm not going to describe too much in details what you see on this slide, but I hope you're gonna see I'm going to get back to this example anyway, but I hope you see what's the potential of these technologies for that specifically. Eventually, in terms of applications, what we're really interested in is to use these technologies for medical robotics. And again, I think I don't have to emphasize this point again, but this is very good for navigating soft magnetic robots into human in a safe and dexterous manner. And so in that case, what you do is you have this flexible tube and you embed magnets along this tube, and you have what we call the magnetic continuum robots that can be steered with our electromagnetic navigation systems. So the first half of that presentation is gonna basically be about talking with these electromagnetic navigation systems and magnetic continuum robots in terms of technology. So what we've done on that to develop these technologies, a little bit on the fundamental research that supports these technologies. So in terms of modeling, control, motion planning, localization. Obviously, I'm not going to have the time to talk about everything, but this is a huge part of our research. And eventually give you an overview of the medical applications we investigated over the years with these technologies. So regarding the modeling control, you actually had an overview in the first talk about some very simple constant coverage models, and also a little bit of these FEM models that you can use to model the system. So there are a lot of literature on that. I'm not going to get back to it. But to give you an example of what we've been doing recently on that, we've been investigating combination of pre-curved concentric tubes and magnetic actuation. So what happened in that case is the video you see on the right hand side are three pre-curved tubes that are inserted within each other's, and you can control the translation and rotation of these tubes within each other's, and you can also control the external magnetic field that's going to deflect, that's going to apply torques on the distal magnet that you see here. Let me try. Can I try to replay this video maybe? Yeah, so this is the magnetic actuation alone, and when you start playing with the tubes, you can see that the combined actuation makes you achieve quite interesting shapes. And what we've been showing with that is interesting is that we've been showing that we can actually we can stabilize these structures using the magnetic field. So concentric tube robots is a well-known structure in robotics that is well known for being subject to some instabilities due to the snapping of the tubes. And in this paper that I show you here, we managed to use the field to either stabilize or destabilize these behaviors, which we think is something very interesting. And in the meantime, we also looked at how we can predict the configuration of soft magnetic systems. So again, I'm getting back to this example that you've seen at the beginning, where all of these different pillars, what we call cilia, are magnetized in a different manner, and we managed to model this deformation with our numerical tool that I'm gonna describe later on. So again, you see this is the simulation that is quite in line with what you observe. So that's something we've done recently. We've been using this a framework that is called SOFA, that is an open source framework to model soft robots, and we've been applying that to our magnetic systems. So by basically incorporating magnetic forces and torques acting on our systems, and we are quite excited by the results we obtained there. So this is a paper that just been accepted to Robotics and Automation Letters, where we show that the simulation that you see on top is in extremely good accordance with the experiments we carried on. And so this isn't a quite, let's say, unrealistic rigid model, but we use this model to show that we can deal with interactions with a already quite complex environment. But the most exciting part with these tools that we are now starting to investigate is to Because obviously this kind of simulation tool that is real time opens up a lot of very exciting perspectives. We can, for example, use that to train surgeons to these new technologies, and we can gamify that quite a bit. We can also use this simulator to learn new control policies and actually use this simulation intraoperatively because it can be used real time. And the example you see now is us playing with the simulation to simulate navigation of this continuum robots into an aneurysm with our with the Navion system. So I guess I'm not going into the details there on how the simulation is working exactly, but just to tell you that this is something we are really excited about. Now, I unfortunately don't have the time to go too much into the details on all of the technologies we've been developing over the years. But here's kind of a patchwork of what we've been looking at. So on the lower left corner, you can see what we've been doing in combining magnetic actuation and variable stiffness. So all of these catheters had a magnet at the tip, and you can essentially change the stiffness of their body. So into quite homogeneous magnetic field. You can see here this bunch of magnets is pointing in the direction of the magnetic field. You can see that we can basically change the stiffness of this of these different catheters so that we make their displacement desynchronized, which is something that is usually quite hard to do with magnetic fields. And on the bottom right side, a simulation of a navigation of one of our tools in a silicon model. Moving on, so in terms of medical applications, we've been looking at different things over the years. Back to 5 years ago, probably the main application we've been looking at was cardiac ablations, because that's something a spin-off of our group investigated in clinic. But over the years, we've been moving a bit from that to look at other problems, including ophthalmic surgery. So on the second video here is an example of pan-retinal photocoagulation, where we have this tiny laser probe that is used to burn tissue on the retina, which is the thin sensitive layer at the back of your eye. We also look at gastroscopies using our tools. So this is in vitro, but we're very much looking into doing that in human, because we think this is something that is reachable now with our systems. And on the far right side, you can see an example of navigation in the bioduct with one of our catheter. I wanted to spend a bit more time on one of the applications we published recently, again, ophthalmic surgery, which is about injecting drugs behind the retina, because I think it illustrates quite well what we can do with our systems. So again, the catheter you see here is basically a micro cannula, about 300 micron in diameter. And we can control the position of the tip of the micro cannula with a 2D visual servoing approach, and eventually we can target push this cannula to puncture the retina and inject some drugs behind the retina, which is something that is difficult to do for ophthalmologists, but that is very promising to treat retinal diseases with the stem cells treatment. And you can see here on an OCT image the bleb created by the liquid that is injected behind the retina. That is a sign that we managed to inject our liquid successfully. And maybe the most recent results we are quite proud about is our use of our last generation of human scale systems in vivo into a porcine model. And this is a very preliminary feasibility study for neuroradiology, where we inserted and steered our catheter in the neck region of the pig, and we managed to show that we could navigate safely, inject a contrast agent. So the main goal of the study was to was for neuroradiology, so essentially diagnostic and eventually being able to go further up in the brain and treat aneurysms and other sort of conditions that occurs in the brain, and of course in a minimally invasive manner. So I give you a really quick overview of what we're doing in terms of medical robotics for these systems, and I hope, and at least I believe this is pretty clear that that this is very promising. But today I also wanted to spend a bit more time talking about more, let's say, fundamental use of magnetics, which I think are also very insightful beyond the obvious medical applications. So something we've been investigating, or at least we've been thinking of for back in 2019 was, okay, now we have this dipole magnet and we know how to manipulate this, but how do we enhance the assembly capabilities of these dipole magnets? If you ever play with magnets, you soon enough you realize that if you play with dipole magnets, they're going to chain, they're going to assemble south to north poles. And our idea here was to extend these capabilities to add bonding sites between two of these two modules. And so to do so, we created what we call the quadrupole modules. That is essentially about combining two dipole into a rigid casing. And by doing so, you create bonding sites on the side of the modules. So you still retain a dipole moment. And that's what you see here in these simulations. You can see that by varying the angles between these two dipoles, you go from a pure dipole for your model for your module, if you just align the two magnetic moments of these components, to a pure quadrupole where you have no dipole moments, meaning that your module is not going to react to any external magnetic field, but it's just going to act as an assembly brick, basically. And so when you do that, you can come up with combinatorial design rules, and so this is an example where we want to assemble this pie shape, and you just have to make sure you alternate between blue and red modules, so that north pole is always facing a south pole. And the nice part about that is that you can decouple the assembly rule to the magnetization rule. Remember, you can still completely control what's going to be the dipole moment of your module. So, and by doing so, you designed both an assembly and an overall magnetization pattern. And this is a fast forward video of the assembly process of this shape. So you can obviously assemble much more complex assembly. And again, you can do exactly the same assembly, but with different magnetization. So in all of this case, the magnetic field is pointing always up, but you see that the shape is going to align in different manners because we just encoded different magnetizations for these modules. And so we think this is a very exciting work. The application is of course less obvious than the magnetic catheters I showed you before, but I think it's touching the fundamentals of magnetics that is very nice as well. The other work I wanted to talk about today is some of the bio-inspired development we did. And one of the things we've been looking at is how to get inspired by these ciliated structures that you can find sometimes on a biological system. So cilia is actually ubiquitous in nature. So this is an example of a larva which use these ciliated structures, so these small cilia that beats on the surface of the larva to create vortices, so that it can both move and feed by trapping nutrients into these vortices. And the way it works overall is to create what we call metachronal waves on top of these surfaces with this array of cilia, which is basically a traveling mechanical wave created by asynchronous motion of the cilia with phase shift. So and we thought that was a very nice thing to try to replicate with magnetism. So the example you see here is an array of artificial cilia. So the the transparent material is just pure echoflex, and the black material is a mix of echoflex and magnetic particles. And the next step is to put this carpet into a magnetization mold. So it's basically a curved surface, and by applying a strong magnetization field along here along the horizontal direction, you're essentially creating a phase shift between the different rows on the carpet. And so when you apply an homogeneous rotating magnetic field, that's what you can see on the right videos, you can go from no phase shift at all, so all of the rows are synchronized, to increasing, sorry, in that case, decreasing wavelength when you increase the curvature of your mold. And so on the topmost video, you can see that we have a wavelength that is roughly actually that is exactly the size of the length of the carpet here. So what do we do with that? Well, one thing that is very interesting is to try to use this artificial system as a benchmark to understand biological systems. And so that's what we did here, where we made this cilia carpet bead at the bottom of the video here and track a bunch of particles above the carpet. And you can see here, this is the trace of these particles over time. And you can see that depending on the wavelength of the carpet, you can create different quality of vortices. And doing so, the very exciting results here is that we managed somehow to basically replicate what have been observed for biological systems. So this is the evolution of the traveling speed of these particles for different heights above the carpet and for different wavelengths. And eventually, getting back to robotics, the super cool thing about that is that if you flip the structure and apply exactly the same rotating magnetic field, you can use that as a locomotion device. So you can make it crawl like a millipede, or if your magnetic field is too strong, make it roll if you can overcome the gravity. And again, the applications are probably less obvious as for us for medical robotic systems, but we think that we're here touching something that is I mean, it's just a cool system at the end of the day. This is how I see it. And the last example I wanted to talk about today is again a bio-inspired system based on microtubule. So a microtubule in nature is a molecular matter that is used for intracellular transport in your body. And so the example you see here in the video is a kinesin protein walking along this microtubule. And taking inspiration from that, what we did is to design a magnetic artificial microtubule, which aim is to transport magnetic particle at very small scales. So to do that, we used an SU8 photoresist that can be manufactured via a photo lithography, and then we electroplated nickel plates that are going to act as stepping stones, or call it whatever you want, like an anchoring point for magnetic particles that are going to be traveling on top of the microtubule. And the way it works is that when you apply an external magnetic field to this plate, you're going to create a strong local gradient. And if you start rotating this field, you're basically going to bind your particle to the stepping stone, and in the meantime, like jumping from one stone to the other in a very stable manner. And so this is an example of a particle traveling around the microtubule for a rotating field of 10 millitesla at 1 Hertz. And this is happening in a 99% glycerol solution, which is around 1,000 times as viscous as water. And yeah, we characterize the influence of the rotating frequency on the transport capability. And I'm not going into the details. I don't have the time to explain to you all of the results here, but we've been able to characterize both the influence of the frequency, and also we've been able to travel against the flow against a flow with this technology, which is something that is actually quite promising, especially when you consider using that kind of system to deliver, for example, drug very locally and at places where conventional methods cannot be used. And eventually you can use that to control swarms of particles as well. The extra step here is that you're going to have first, when you start applying the field, the particles first are going to bundle and assemble on the stepping stones, and then when you start rotating the field, these bundles of particles are going to travel around the microtubule as well. And when you extend that in 2D, so you can have this really cool 2D transport method. So the video you see here is not less than just the microtubule extending in 2D. So each of these small anchoring points are nickel plates put on a 2D plane. And by applying this rotating magnetic field, you can transport this cluster of particles on top of it, which I think it's quite of a mesmerizing video, which I wanted to use to conclude my talk. So I wanted especially to thank these guys, because obviously this is not only my work. Especially the last three examples that you've seen is mostly the PhD thesis of Richard, who is now a postdoctoral associate in Constance University. And so yes, thank you for your attention, and I'm open to questions.